Hello, everyone. This is biology. We are working on module 12, talking about plants. Today, we're going to be working on page 1 and 2 of the class notes. Now, the study of physiology is the study of life processes of an organism. Oh, let's go back to black. Study of life processes of a plant or any organism of an organism. You can study the physiology of a human being. You can study the physiology of bacteria. But we're going to be studying structure first, and then we get into the physiology of plants a little bit. We've also already studied some of physiology of plants when we got into photosynthesis and looking at that. So the study of plants, which, if you remember, is called botany. The study of plants includes plant structure, it includes the process of transportation. So how does the plant get the nutrients that it needs? It involves plant growth. How does a plant get bigger? How does a plant mature? Where does it start? Where does it end? We've already done some of that when we're talking about reproduction. Okay, also plant hormones. What chemicals make the plant do what it does? And last, plant responses. How does a plant respond to its environment? How does it change? Now, as we're going through the structure of plants, keep in mind that there are two categories of organs and tissues. One are vegetative organs. And this is anything that's not reproductive, like the stem, the leaves, the roots. And then second is the reproductive organs. And we studied these in the last module. And this includes things like flowers, fruit, seeds, cones. And of course, it would include anything, any of the organs inside of a flower as well. Pollen would be included in this. So keep that in mind as we start going through these different parts of a plant. Now, there are two main systems in a plant. One is the root system, which is composed of roots and of the little down here, composed of roots. And its function is to absorb nutrients, like water, minerals. Its second function, can you think about it? What would it be? It's to anchor the plant, to keep it from blowing away. And the third function is to store things, so storage. For example, root vegetables store a lot of their extra glucose down in roots. Things like carrots and turnips, radishes, things like that. They're storing food or extra food in their roots. The second one is the shoot system. This is composed of leaves and stem. So whereas the root system is growing down, the shoot system is what grows up. Now its main function is photosynthesis. And of course, the stem does do photosynthesis, but it's also supporting the leaves. It's a support structure to make the leaves kind of grow apart from each other a little bit. Now, there are 4 kinds of tissues inside of a plant. And this includes the meristematic tissue. Now, the meristematic tissue is found in places where the plant is growing. Just starting to, like the stems becoming longer, the shoots at the ends of the branches, the tips of roots. For example, the tips of the stems and the tips of roots. And this has the kind of stems, the kind of cells that are called stem cells. And these have no particular function yet, but they can develop into any kind of cell. It's whatever the plant needs. So this is what's called unspecialized. A specialized cell will have one function. It will be stem, it will be root, it will be storage, it will be a flower, whatever it is. It's a specialized cell, but these stem cells are unspecialized. Another word for this is undifferentiated. Okay, this becomes what the cell needs. And that can be leaves or roots, etc. Now, the second kind of tissue we're going to talk about is ground tissue. Now, this is the most common tissue in a plant. And it has some different functions. The first function is, the first kind of tissue is parenchyma. Parenchyma provides storage. And of course, what is the plant producing that it needs to store? Well, starches, which are complex carbohydrates, and oils for the most part. Parenchyma is going to be found in things like a potato or in seeds. Seeds are a place where oils are stored because they're there for nourishment for the plant. The second kind of tissue is called collenchyma. And this has thicker cell walls. And it's just below the surface, just below the outer covering. And its function is to support the stem. Let me change that. Okay, outer covering. And it supports stem. An example of this would be the strands just below the surface of celery. That's an example of collenchyma. Now the next one is sclerenchyma. And this one is dead cells. They're filled with lignin. Filled with lignin, and lignin is a chemical that makes something very strong, very stiff. So its function is to support the stem. An example of this is going to be bark in trees. Dead cells that are very stiff and very hard and allow the tree to grow up hundreds of feet into the air. So that's ground tissue. You can see it's labeled in this right here, ground tissue. Now the next kind of tissue is dermal tissue. And this is found in the outer covering of plants. Dermal is a word often referred to as skin, so outer covering of plants. And it's usually called the epidermis, which epidermis often applies to any outer covering in any organism. Not 100% of the time, but a lot of the time. It acts as a shield. Its function is to shield the inside of the plant. I did it again. Forgot my E. And that's really shielding it from anything outside the plant that's harmful. Shields it from insects, bacteria, fungi, anything that could cause it damage, just like our skin does. It also is responsible for taking in nutrients. So like water in the roots and stoma in the leaves. We'll put nutrients there. Water, air. So it kind of is the gateway to the plant. It controls this. Sclerenchyma is not able to control what comes in and out. Is dead. The dermal tissue is able to control that. Now the last two tissues that we're going to discuss are vascular tissues. Now remember that vascular tissue is tubes. Tube-shaped cells, both of them. And its function is transportation. Remember, all plants have vascular tissues except for bryophytes. Those are the mosses. Everything else has it. Now you have the xylem and you have the phloem. Now, the xylem is non-living tissue. It's still tubes, it's still transporting, but it's not living. And this carries dissolved minerals and water. And water up. From the roots up. The phloem is living tissue. Remember, it's vascular. It's also tube-shaped, but it's living tissue. And it carries the glucose, the sugars, food, and anything else that's needed. And they carry them down from where photosynthesis is happening. Now, the way I remember is phloem flows down. Phloem flows down. Xylem is X. No longer lives. X marks the spot. It's been X'd out. It's not living. But xylem flows down. That's how I remember it. Okay, let's go on to the next page. Now let's go ahead and talk about roots. We've already talked about the root function a little bit. So we're just going to write it here again. The root function absorbs nutrients. And basically those nutrients are water and minerals. The second is it anchors, holds it down, anchors the plant. And number 3, it's placed to storage, for storage. So an example of this storage would be a carrot. When we eat the carrot, we're eating stored food in the carrot. Okay, there's 2 types of root systems. One is called fibrous. And that's right here. It's easier to see it than it is to describe it. It's branching. And then the branches have branches, and the branches have branches. And this is found in monocots. So like grass, corn, daffodils, tulips, lilies, things like that are monocots. The other system is over here, and that's called a taproot. For example, like a carrot and trees, things like that. And this is a 1 primary root. With little tiny root hairs coming off of it. So we'll say root hairs coming off. And this is usually in dicots and in gymnosperms. Remember what gymnosperms are? Those are the conifers, where they have cones. Now let's talk about stems. There are 4 forms of a stem. One is erect. That means it is growing up, straight up out of the ground, like a tree. Most plants, or many plants, grow straight up. One is climbing. And this is a plant that has ways of holding on to other things to climb up them. And often these are vines, but they actually have tendrils or hooks, things that will actually hold on to help them grow up. Prostrate grow along the ground. These ones are vines that don't have any hooks. They don't have any way of actually holding on and growing up. So they just grow naturally along the ground. The thing with it is that a lot of in our human gardens, we often take prostrate vines and attach them to things to help them grow, to give them the support they need to go up. So I'm going to say they're also vines. Subterranean means underground. An example of a subterranean stem would be a potato. Or in grass, if you look up here at this grass plant, it will send out stems underground to produce new plants. And like that's an asexual way of reproducing. And those stems would be subterranean. So a plant can have more than one kind of stem. They can have erect stems and subterranean stems. They might have erect stems and prostrate or climbing stems. It all depends on the plant. There's such a huge variety in plants. Now we're going to talk about some of the differences if you look inside the stem. And see, we have some pictures right here of stems that were like, you're looking at it like it was cut into a little slice and you're looking from the top down. Now a monocot will have its vascular bundles scattered throughout. It's vascular. Okay, let me re-go that. Vascular bundles spread throughout the stem. It's not always as clear as this, but this is what we're talking about. This is a monocot. It's got vascular tissue. There's not necessarily any particular order to it. You think about it, like it kind of looks like a face. Can look like a face. Not everything looks like a face. This one kind of looks like a monkey face. A dicot has something more like this. So this is more of the dicot. The dicot is clumped together in bundles. That's the vascular tissue we were talking about. So I'm going to put that in there. Vascular tissue. Is in bundles. And then it's often in a circle or often in rings. You see it down here in rings. Now there are similarities between this. They both have an epidermis. Both have bundles. That means that the xylem and the phloem are kind of grouped together. And each has a stem and a cortex. Cortex is simply referring to the inside of the stem. Now that's in a herbaceous stem. Remember, herbaceous stems are green and they're flexible. A woody stem is rough and hard. Oftentimes they're brown or black. And they can be in trees, but they can also be in bushes. And honestly, you find woody stems a lot more in perennial plants that grow every year than you will in plants that are just grow for a season. Okay, now woody stems are only found in dicots. And because of the structure of a dicot stem, where it has it arranged in circles, it's much easier for it to develop these hard rings of sclerenchyma. So there's two kinds of bark. You have inner bark, and then you have outer bark down here. So the inner bark is composed of phloem and cortex tissue. Between the two of these, we'll talk about the outer bark in a minute, but between the two of them, you have a layer of cork cambium tissue. Layer of cork cambium. And that's a tissue. And this produces cork cells. Excuse me. Produces cork cells. Sorry. Okay, produces cork cells, and then what happens to the cork cells? They quickly die. And they keep moving out. So more of these cork cells get produced underneath and keep pushing the old ones, the ones that have died or in the process of dying, out towards the outside. They get pushed outside. And they become the outer bark. So it's dead cork cells. And sometimes you see it crack and break. And that shows you that there are more dead cork cells pushing from the inside, because once they form, they don't flex. They don't fill in nice and smoothly. They just crack. Remember, those are new cork cells. It's just showing you that the tree is outgrowing, or the bush is outgrowing the old bark. And this is where growth rings come from, is these cork cambium cells filling in and growing bigger. Now remember, with most deciduous trees, and deciduous trees are trees that lose their leaves, and we'll write that in a minute, but with most trees that lose their rings, or their tree, well, I guess really any tree that has its that has cork has a season of growing and a season of rest. It may lose its leaves, it may not lose its leaves. We see it more dramatically in the trees that lose their leaves, but pine trees are going through this too. In the spring, there's plenty of water. Great growing conditions, so that the xylem are produced are quite large. Remember, that's in the inner part of the tree. And the wood is also a lighter color. In the summer, the water is scarcer. So the xylem is smaller. And the wood produced is darker. And you can tell the growing tissues, the growing conditions, based on the size of the rings. Each year, one of these rings, which is one light and one dark, is produced. Now, if the size of the ring is very fat, see a big ring, you'll see that there was a good growing season. It could produce a lot of tissue, thicken itself quite a bit. But if it was small ring or very, very thin rings, it means it was a poor growing season, like in a drought. Okay, that finishes this video. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, please let me know.